So you're here listening to this, and I bet it's because you have this goal, right? This idea of yourself speaking English fluently.
I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah. And it makes sense. Think about what that opens up. I mean, really, more opportunities in your career,
Yeah.
right? Connecting more easily with people all over the world and just being able to enjoy so much more of what's out there, books, movies, everything.
It's a huge shift, no doubt.
Absolutely. And that's really what we're diving into today. We've got this fantastic guide just packed with advice on how to get to that point, where you're speaking English smoothly, naturally.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive resource.
It is. And our goal today, what we really want to do in this deep dive, is to pull out the most effective strategies, the stuff that'll really make a difference in your journey to fluency.
Right, like a roadmap. We want to cut through the noise, all the different advice out there, and give you the clearest, most direct path. And speaking of paths, I think it's helpful to define what we mean by fluency right up front. This guide does a great job of emphasizing that it's not about some kind of unrealistic perfection.
Yeah, you're not aiming to sound like I don't know, like a Shakespearean actor or something.
Exactly. Real fluency, the kind that matters in everyday life, it's about being able to express yourself without constantly stopping to search for words, using correct grammar naturally, almost without thinking about it. And perhaps most importantly, being able to think and speak directly in English, without that translation step in your head.
Right. And, as I was going through this guide, it really struck me how much emphasis it puts on building that strong base, mastering the fundamentals. It's like anything you want to build well, right? You need
Yeah.
a solid foundation.
Absolutely. Like a house or, even a piece of music. You can't just jump to the fancy stuff without understanding the basics.
Exactly.
hmm
And in the context of English, that means getting a good grasp of grammar.
That's right. And the guide doesn't overwhelm you with every single grammar rule. Instead, it highlights the ones that will give you the most leverage, particularly early on. Things like tenses.
Okay, so that's about how we talk about things happening in different times, right? Like
Yeah.
now, in the past, in the future.
Yeah. And there are these subtle but important differences in meaning conveyed by the different forms. The simple tenses, the continuous tenses, the perfect tenses, and even those perfect continuous forms.
And, I always find it helpful when a guy doesn't just throw a bunch of technical terms at you.
Right. Because ultimately, it's not really about memorizing labels for different tenses. It's about understanding how to use them to express yourself accurately. Like, are you talking about something that happened once in the past or something that was ongoing, something that will be completed in the future, or something that will be in progress? Those are the real world applications.
And I really appreciate that this guide, it doesn't say you have to become a grammar expert before you even open your mouth.
No, definitely not.
It actually encourages you to start speaking and then refine your grammar as you go.
Exactly. It's more like, learning to cook. You start with a basic recipe, you get a feel for how things work together, and as you get more comfortable, then you can start experimenting and understanding the why behind the techniques.
I love that analogy. And I think for a lot of people, it takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to be perfect from day one.
Exactly. And alongside those core grammar concepts, the guide also highlights, and rightly so, the importance of basic sentence structure. The subject-verb-object order that's so common in English.
Like the classic example, I like pizza.
Yeah, exactly. It seems so simple, but it's the foundation for countless English sentences.
So much of communication is built on that foundation.
It really is. And then there are those little words that we might not think about much, but they're everywhere and they make a huge difference. Articles a, an, and the.
Little things, but they can trip you up.
Oh, definitely. Like if you say, I have cat, it sounds strange, right?
Yeah.
You need that a in there, I have a cat. Then there are prepositions.
The words that tell you where things are or how they relate to each other.
Exactly. In, on, at, under, between. All of those. And then you've got conjunctions, the words that help you connect ideas smoothly, like and, but, or, because, although.
And it's really amazing when you think about how often we use these basic building blocks in every sentence we speak.
Yeah, they're like the essential ingredients in every dish.
So true. Getting comfortable with them really does give you this solid platform to build on to express more complex thought.
That's like trying to build a tall tower, right? You
Yeah.
need that strong foundation, otherwise it's all going to come crumbling down.
Exactly. And speaking of building, the guide really stresses how important it is to build up your vocabulary.
Of course. It's pretty intuitive, right? The more words you know, the more easily and accurately you can express what you want to say.
Makes sense. But what I found helpful were the practical methods it suggests.
Yeah, it gets into the nitty-gritty, which is great.
It does. Like one of the things it suggests is aiming to learn a certain number of new words every day. And it keeps it realistic. It says something like 5 to 10 words a day.
That's a really manageable number, isn't it? And if you stick to it consistently, you'd be surprised how quickly your vocabulary grows.
Right. It's that consistency that really makes a difference.
Absolutely. And, speaking of consistency, the guide recommends using those flashcard apps. You probably already have a few on your phone. Anki, Quizlet, Memrise, things like that.
They're so convenient.
And they can make learning new words much more engaging, right? It's not just staring at a list. You've got
Yeah.
interactive quizzes, games, all sorts of things to help those words stick.
Yeah, I think that interactivity is really important. It helps keep things fresh. And what's interesting about those apps is how many of them use this technique called spaced repetition.
Oh, yeah. That's a really effective method. Instead of just reviewing all the words over and over, they actually focus on the words that you're about to forget. So it makes your study time much more efficient.
Yeah, you're targeting those tricky words that just don't seem to want to stick.
Exactly. And it helps get them into your long-term memory, which is, of course, what we're aiming for.
Right, not just recognizing them for a quiz, but actually being able to use them. And, even though we've got all this technology now, the guide also mentions keeping a vocabulary notebook.
The old school method.
I know, but there's something about writing things down by hand, seeing those words in your own writing, and you could create your own example sentences, really put them in context.
I think there's a real value in that tactile experience. It's like you're physically building that connection in your brain.
And it's not just about memorizing individual words in isolation, right? The guide emphasizes learning synonyms.
Ah, yes. So, for example, if you learn the word happy, the guide suggests also learning words like joyful, glad, cheerful, delighted.
So it's not just about having one word for an idea, but expanding your range of expression.
Exactly. It gives you more nuances, more shades of meaning, and makes your English sound richer, more sophisticated.
Yeah, instead of just saying good all the time, you can say excellent, fantastic, wonderful, terrific.
Precisely. And of course, all of this vocabulary building, it's not just a mental exercise. The guide really hammers this point. You have to use the words actively in your own speaking and writing.
Otherwise, they just sort of sit there in your brain, right? Like unused tools.
Exactly. You got to get them out, practice with them, make them a part of your active vocabulary.
Okay, so we're building our vocabulary, we're getting a handle on grammar. But what about actually sounding more like a fluent English speaker?
Right. That's where pronunciation comes into play. You could have fantastic vocabulary, perfect grammar, but if people can't understand what you're saying, it's a major roadblock.
And the guide really emphasizes that, doesn't it?
It does, and it gets really specific about how to work on it. It strongly recommends surrounding yourself with the sounds of English, like immersing yourself in it as much as possible.
And it gives some very accessible ways to do that, like watching movies and TV shows, listening to music, checking out content on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, YouTube is a goldmine. You can find anything on there. And for English learners specifically, it recommends podcasts like BBC Learning English and The Fluent Show.
And audiobooks too, right?
Yeah, audiobooks are great. And good old-fashioned radio. It's all about training your ear to the rhythm and intonation of the language.
Getting used to how it actually sounds when native speakers are talking. And it's interesting, one of the things it suggests is actually using tongue twisters.
Ah, yes. Those can be fun and surprisingly helpful.
Yeah, they might seem a bit silly, like something you do for a party trick, but they really do help you practice specific sounds, train the muscles in your mouth to make those sounds clearly.
It's like vocal exercises for your tongue and lips. And speaking of tools, the guide also highlights some of the online pronunciation resources that are out there. Things like Google Pronunciation, Forvo, ELSA Speak. Have you used any of those?
I've definitely played around with some of them, and what I like is that they give you that immediate feedback. You can say a word, and it'll tell you how close you are to the native pronunciation.
It's like having a pronunciation coach in your pocket, and it can be really motivating to see yourself getting closer and closer to that target sound.
And, another technique the guide mentions that I found really helpful is the shadowing technique. Have you ever tried that?
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful one.
It is. Basically, you listen to a native speaker and try to imitate them in real time as closely as you can.
It's like their shadow, mimicking their every word and inflection. And what it does is it forces you to pay attention not just to the individual sounds, but to the whole package. Their rhythm, their intonation, their pace.
It's like learning to dance by following the footsteps of a professional dancer. You're not just learning the individual steps, you're learning how to move with that same grace and flow.
I love that analogy. And that's what we're aiming for with fluency, isn't it? Not just speaking correctly, but speaking in a way that feels natural and effortless.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
Okay, so we're building that foundation with vocabulary and grammar. We're tuning our ears to the sounds of English. But of course, fluency is ultimately about speaking,
Mhm.
about being able to express ourselves. So how do we actively work on developing those speaking skills, that confidence to just speak?
Well, the guide really emphasizes the importance of practice, and the more the better, ideally every day. And it acknowledges that, not everyone has someone to practice with all the time. So it even suggests talking to yourself.
Now, that might sound a little strange to some people, right?
It might feel a bit odd at first, but it can be a really effective way to get comfortable forming sentences and speaking them out loud, even if you're your own audience.
And, it makes sense when you think about it. Like, we talk to ourselves in our heads all the time.
Exactly.
So why not do it out loud? And the guide gives some great examples of things you can practice talking about, like describing your daily routine. I wake up at 7 a.m., I have coffee, I check my email.
Or talking about your plans for the day. Today I'm going to the grocery store and then I'm meeting a friend for lunch. Or even just recounting something that happened to you. Yesterday I saw a really interesting movie.
Yeah, I like that. It's
Yeah.
just about getting those words flowing, getting used to the feeling of speaking English.
And then, of course, if you can connect with other people, either other learners or native speakers, that takes your practice to a whole new level.
Absolutely. You're putting yourself out there, really using the language in a real-world setting.
Exactly. And the guide mentions some great resources for finding speaking partners. Things like language exchange apps like HelloTalk, Tandem, Speaky.
Those are great because you can connect with people from all over the world who are learning English, or maybe they want to learn your native language, and you can help each other out.
It's a win-win. And it gives you that opportunity to engage in real conversations, respond to questions, share ideas. You're not just practicing in isolation.
And that's so important, right?
Mm.
Because real communication is dynamic. It's about back and forth, not just delivering a prepared speech.
Exactly. And the guide also mentions looking for English-speaking clubs or online forums.
There are so many online communities now. It's amazing.
Yeah, they can provide a really supportive environment and maybe some more structured opportunities for speaking practice.
And the shadowing technique we talked about earlier, that comes up again in this section on speaking.
Ah, yes. Because it's not just about pronunciation, it's also about getting that natural flow and speed.
Yeah, you're internalizing those patterns, that rhythm of spoken English, like the way a native speaker would pause, speed up, slow down, emphasize certain words.
Exactly. And the guide suggests something that can be really helpful, but maybe a little daunting. Record yourself speaking.
Yeah, that can feel a bit awkward,
Yeah.
but it's so valuable. Pick a topic, talk for a couple of minutes, and then listen back to yourself.
It's like holding a mirror up to your speaking, and it can really help you identify areas where you can improve. You might notice that you're speaking too slowly, or maybe rushing through certain words. Maybe your intonation is a bit flat, or your pronunciation of certain sounds could be clearer.
And it's amazing how much you pick up when you listen back to yourself that you wouldn't necessarily notice while you're speaking.
It's like having an instant replay of your speaking performance. And of course, being fluent isn't just about speaking, it's also about understanding what other people are saying to you. So listening skills are crucial.
Absolutely. You got to be able to understand what's coming back at you in the conversation.
Right. And the guide gives a lot of great advice on how to improve your listening comprehension. It starts with the same idea as improving your pronunciation. Surround yourself with English.
Podcasts, music, movies, all that.
Yeah. And it gives some more specific podcast recommendations like The English We Speak, which focuses on idioms and everyday expressions.
And for TV shows, it suggests things like Friends, The Office, Sherlock, shows that use a lot of everyday language.
Yeah, those are all really popular shows, and for good reason. And the guide emphasizes that it's not enough to just passively listen. You have to listen actively.
Okay, so what does that mean, active listening?
It means really focusing on what's being said. Try to grasp the main idea. Notice any new vocabulary. Pay attention to the speaker's tone of voice because that can convey a lot of meaning. And the guide suggests something really simple but effective. Pause the audio and repeat sentences.
So you're not just letting the words wash over you, you're engaging with them, almost interacting with them.
Exactly. And, one of the things that really jumped out at me in the guide is this section on the mental shift, thinking in English.
Oh yeah, that's a big one, isn't it?
It really is. For a lot of learners, that mental translation process, going from their native language to English and back again, that's a major obstacle to fluency.
It really slows you down, and
Yeah.
it can make your speech sound less natural.
Exactly. So the guide emphasizes trying to break that habit, that translation habit.
And how do you do that?
Well, it suggests starting with small everyday situations. Like, if you see an apple, don't think of the word for apple in your native language first. Immediately think apple in English.
And I love the example the guy gives. Instead of thinking in your native language, let's say, "Wujibuk lagi hai," and then translating it to "I am hungry," you train your brain to go directly to the English thought.
Exactly. And it takes practice, but it's like building a mental shortcut. And as you get comfortable with single words, start forming simple sentences in your head in English. Like, I'm going to the kitchen, I want a cup of tea.
Yeah, narrate your life in English, even if it's just to yourself.
Exactly. It's like providing your own internal English commentary.
Okay, so we're starting to think in English. But how do we sound more natural? More like a native speaker?
Well, that's where learning common phrases and idioms comes in.
Ah, those are the things that can really trip you up, right? Because they don't always translate literally.
Yeah, and native speakers use them all the time. So understanding and being able to use them correctly can make a big difference in how natural your English sounds.
The guide has some great examples of those phrases, like, "How's it going?" as a more casual way to say, "How are you?"
Or long time no see for when you haven't seen someone in a while.
Or, "I'm just killing time," for when you're waiting around with nothing specific to do.
Exactly. And then there are the idioms, which can really add color to your English.
Okay, so those are the phrases that have a figurative meaning, right?
Exactly. They don't mean exactly what the words say, like break a leg, which actually means good luck.
Yeah, that one always confuses people.
Yeah.
Or "hit the sack," meaning go to sleep.
Or piece of cake for something that's really easy. Learning these not only helps you understand what people are saying, but it allows you to express yourself in a more culturally relevant way.
It's like you're not just speaking the language, you're also understanding the culture behind it.
Right. You're getting a deeper understanding of how the language is used in everyday life. And speaking of everyday life, one of the things I've always found incredibly helpful for language learning is reading. And the guide has a whole section on the power of reading.
Yeah, reading is fantastic for so many reasons. You see words in context, you pick up new vocabulary naturally, you get a feel for how sentences are structured.
It's like immersing yourself in the language in a very relaxed and enjoyable way. And the guide recommends what it calls a graduated reading approach.
Okay, what's that?
It basically means starting with simpler books, books that are written for a younger audience, maybe. Things like The Little Prince or Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, those are great stories, even for adults.
They really are. And then, as your comprehension skills improve, you can gradually move on to more complex books. The guide suggests books like The Alchemist or the Harry Potter series.
And I think that graduated approach makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you start with something too difficult, it can be really discouraging.
Absolutely. It's like trying to run a marathon before you can even walk. You want to build up your reading stamina gradually.
And the guide also recommends reading English news sources like BBC News, The Guardian, The New York Times.
That's a great way to stay informed about current events while also exposing yourself to high-quality writing. And I was really interested to see that it specifically mentions reading aloud as a technique to improve fluency.
Yeah, that one can be really helpful because you're combining the benefits of reading with the active practice of speaking.
Exactly. You're working on your pronunciation, your intonation, and your fluency all at the same time.
Okay, and one more thing I wanted to touch on from the guide, because I think this is really important. The idea of connecting with other English learners.
Yeah, that sense of community can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Learning a language, it can sometimes feel like a very solitary endeavor. But when you connect with other people who are going through the same process, it can be so motivating. You can share your challenges, celebrate your successes, get tips from each other.
It's like having a support group, right? A group of people who understand what you're going through. And the guide mentions some specific places you can find these communities online. Things like Facebook groups like Learn English with Friends, or Reddit threads like English Learning.
And there are so many online forums where you can connect with other learners from all over the world.
It's really amazing. And being part of a community can also expose you to different learning styles, different resources, different perspectives that you might not have discovered on your own.
And then finally, and then this might be the most important point of all, the guide emphasizes staying consistent and staying motivated. Because learning a language, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
It's so true. And we all have those days where we just don't feel like studying. Oh, absolutely.
But the key is to keep going, even if it's just a little bit each day.
And the guide gives some great advice on how to do that, like setting small, achievable daily goals. It could be as simple as learning a few new words, or practicing speaking for 5 minutes, or writing a short paragraph. Little steps, taken consistently over time, they really add up. And the guide also suggests keeping a learning journal, which I think is a brilliant idea. Write down what you did each day, what you learned, what challenges you faced, what successes you had.
It's a way to track your progress, right?
Hmm.
And it can be so motivating to look back and see how far you've come.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those successes along the way. Give yourself a little reward when you hit a milestone. And maybe find a study buddy, someone you can practice with and hold each other accountable.
Yeah, a little bit of friendly competition can be a good thing. And I think the guide really sums it up beautifully. Practice makes progress.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So if you want to reach that goal of speaking English fluently, it really comes down to those three things. Speaking regularly, actively expanding your vocabulary, and immersing yourself in listening to native speakers.
And remember, every mistake you make is not a failure. It's an opportunity to learn and improve. Embrace those mistakes as part of the process.
So start today. Speak a little English every single day, even if it's just to yourself, and you will be amazed at how far you can come.
And as you think about all the different things we've talked about today, from building that foundation of grammar and vocabulary to refining your pronunciation, learning to think in English, understanding those tricky idioms, which area do you feel is going to be the most rewarding for you to focus on right now, and why? That's a question I'd love for you to ponder as you continue on your English language journey.
It's all about finding what works for you and taking those steps one day at a time.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.